Hi, and welcome to the GT Woodshop and part 3 of a journey into joinery. In this video, we're going to cut a lap joint. Now, some may call it a halving joint, but I always think of a halving joint as a cross halving joint, and we're going to cut a lap joint. So the two ends of the pieces overlapped. That works for me anyway. So the tools I'm going to be using, tape measure in case I need it, Woodpecker square, 641, I have a pencil just in case, I have a marking knife which is a scalpel handle with replaceable scalpel blades, screwdriver in case I need to change my blade, I have my Dozuku saw, I think that's right, and I also have a backless version of the Dozuku saw. I have no idea what it's called. I do apologize. I'll put that up on the screen. And most importantly, differing from the previous video, I have some marking gauges. If you haven't already seen part 1 or part 2, or most importantly the introduction, I recommend that you do just pause this video and pop back and have a look at the introduction. It will put everything in context for you. I'll put a card up here and I'll put links in the description. So the marking gauge. The marking gauge is used to allow us to strike a line on the timber wherever we want to, really. In this case, for the lap joint, we need to know exactly where center of the timber is, because the joint on one piece of timber, we're going to cut away the top half. Let me do that over here for this camera, and we'll cut that bit away. And on this piece, we'll cut that bit away. And then the two, if I've got all my marks right, will fit together flush top and bottom. The benefit of this joint over the butt joint is that we'll effectively have a shoulder here for this piece to rest against, and the same on the other, so that they will resist this movement, therefore a stronger joint. And also there'll be more area there for us to apply glue to. So without further ado, let's start marking. Let's do it that way so you can see. 32 mil. So that means my center point is around 16, about there. So that's the point I need to set my marking gauge to. So as mentioned, I have two types of marking gauge. I have an old-fashioned Marples, and this is the gauge that I'm used to using. It's very inexpensive to buy, very simple setup. There's a pin there that marks the wood, and there's a movable forgotten the damn name of it section, that shoulder that you use to put up against the timber, and then the pin marks the wood. I'll look up the price for this and I'll put it on the screen. And then there's this extremely beautiful looking fancy Veritas gauge. Now the difference between the two being, this has got a pin and this has got a disc, a sharp disc, changeable by way of that single screw. And the idea behind this is the disc is easier to run across the surface of the wood, whereas the pin can dig in and tear. This theoretically will cut. I believe they've released an uprated version of this. If that is the case, then I'll look it up for you and I'll put it on the screen. So the usage of both is the same, whereas with this there's the big knob to lock it off. With this one there's the little brass knurled knob there to lock it off. So to set, you loosen off the brass knurled knob. I'm not sure if I can see that without getting in the way of the camera. And keeping the shoulder hard against the timber, put it where you think it needs to be and lock it off. And then a single mark and change sides and do the same thing. And if you're lucky enough, as I've just been, to get it right, you'll have a single hole. If it's off, you'll have two holes. If you do have two holes, then the adjustment is to slacken off the knob again and place the pin in between the two holes, thereby achieving center. So let's try that now with the Veritas. And let's set the Veritas gauge off slightly so you can see how it... So there's one mark. And there's the other. Hopefully you're getting that. Now if I slacken that knob off, I should be able to adjust that so it's in the center. This seems to have a tendency to spring back. So I like it there, I think. So I'll lock it off. Roll for mark. That is a hair off, an absolute fraction off. Absolute fraction, really. Looks good. So my marking gauges are set. I wouldn't normally use two, just the one. So my next step is to mark back from the edge of the timber to give myself a shoulder line to cut to. Now there's two ways to do this. Number one, we can measure the width of the timber and use the tape measure and mark back. Or we can use the timber itself and place it on the edge, and then we can take our knife and we can mark. I prefer this method as I don't have to rely on my diminishing eyesight. So now to square around, I'm going to put my knife back in the mark, slide my square up to the knife, with the knife at a slight angle again to allow for the bevel on the edge of the blade. And then I'll make my mark, turn my board or piece over, put the knife in the mark, slide the bevel up, mark again. And down. Now, on this side, I've scored my line with the knife all the way down to the bottom. And on this side, I remembered that I shouldn't have done that. So if I'm cutting this top piece out, which I fully intend to, then once the joint is complete, this piece is going to have a scar there. And this piece isn't. Now, I could have got over that if I'd have done something like that to give myself a line to go down to, but I forgot, so I'll remember on the next one. So always remembering to strike your gauge against your face side or face edge, and then keeping the gauge shoulder firmly against that edge, you can drag it back. You may have to do that several times depending on the hardness of the timber you're using. As mentioned before, I believe either in this video or the last, I've just got some soft deal or whatever from B&Q. As it's cheap, there's a theme here. And lastly, I'll do the end. So if I've got everything correct, those lines should line up. Again, I'm hoping I've got this in the right place for you to be able to see that they do. And now I'm going to use my trusty pencil to remind me of my addled old brain that it's that bit I need to remove. So cool, so I've got my two sides marked. So my first job I'm going to do is unsheath my weapon of choice. Shiny and new. And I'm not going to cut on the line, I'm going to cut away from the line. Hoping you can see that. And by doing that, if I don't get dead square with the saw, it doesn't really matter, because I'll pare back to that line with my chisels that I forgot to put out on the table. Strike me down. So again, as before in the previous video, I'm just using my thumb to guide the blade while it starts. And I'm not going to go all the way down either, as I want to chisel back to that line. Let's do the same on this one. Nice, nice big lump of debris under there. Cool. Just far enough. Once again, I'm going to use my thumb. Looks like this saw's going to be just deep. Less friction. I've only used this Japanese saw 3 or 4 times now, half a dozen times, but it really is a pleasure. Okay, so we've got our 2 pieces rough cut, and now we need to pare them back. So I have my chisels out, the very same chisels that we sharpened in part 1. My approach to chiseling back to a shoulder line is to start in the middle and not directly on the line. So I'm going to start part way over the line, see if I can mark it. something like that, so that I can get rid of the majority of the material and leave myself just a little bit to be able to clean back to that shoulder line. And I'm going to start in the middle and work my way out to the ends, so that my last cut, I can allow the back of the chisel to follow that shoulder line all the way down, and all things being equal, and if Lady Luck's with me, it'll be a nice clean shoulder. So here goes. Now I'll come back to the shoulder line. Let's turn around to this way. Now I'm going to work my way across to the right hand edge. Just taking off a little bit at a time. Now, hardwood's actually easier to work with because it resists tearing better. And here we go. Well, for Rusty McNabbs here, that's not bad at all. I hope you can see that. Just want to clean the tiniest bit off. And I'm doing that, staying back from that edge. Lovely. And I'll do the same here. See if I can turn so you can see that. So by starting in the middle and then nibbling my way across to each end, by the time I get to the edge, there's very little timber there left for me to take off, so I can use less pressure and I've got more control. So one done. Let's do number 2. Once again, start away from the line. Gradually work up to the shoulder line on the edge. So now I've decided I'm going to pare down on this edge, following the line left by the marking gauge. I'm going to do the same here. That way, if I can use the phrase, the potential point of breakout is now set back in the timber away from the edge. as I don't have any hold-fast holes in my bench yet, I'm going to pare it out from here. And then snip it off at the back. And that looks fairly clean. Let's do the same on this one. Nice and lightly to begin with. So I just want to reinforce that break point. And now the moment of truth. Let's see if it fits. Well, I think it fits rather well. I'm not sure which camera to show it to. I'll do both. The simple lap joint. Very useful joint. Again, a great joint to use in the likes of a bench if you're doing the H frames or not A frames. Frames at each end or center support. With the leg and the stile across the middle, rail across the middle, sorry. I hope you've enjoyed watching this video. If you have, why not consider a thumbs up? I'm sure you have many to spare. And if you'd like to see future videos in this series, then why not hit the subscribe button and tick on the little bell. The next joint in this series will be the cross-halving joint. I hope to see you for that bright and early tomorrow morning. Thanks for watching, and ta-ra for now.